Good evening, welcome to Reality Check, and perhaps the name of this program is particularly important today because one of the big questions that we are facing in our time is how do you know what is reality and what is not? What is the truth, what is not? What is fake and what is not? We've just had that absolutely horrific incident in Jharkhand where a number of people were killed in the most brutal manner possible, and that was because of a WhatsApp message that was entirely and completely fake. But that question is then spreading because you have some people saying, well, you need to go to the established news media, you need to go to established sources of information because that is what the truth is, that is what is real. But others will say that's not the case. If you see the trends in the United States, in India and others, people are saying, well, the mainstream media is also fake, this is fake news. What they are putting out is not correct either. So what is really the importance of truth? What is the importance of, or how do you tell what is fake from what is not fake? That's what really we are here to discuss. And it's a pleasure to have with us Jim Egan, who's the CEO of BBC Global, who's just done a substantial survey and a study on what the value of trust is for audiences here in India. And I'm going to come to you to get to some of the major findings of that. So we'll discuss those findings of what is fake and what is not fake. And then on the broader question of how do we deal with fake news, and also is there a crisis that the media is getting into around the world with this entire game of smoke and mirrors between the truth and what is true and what is not true. Madhu Trehan joins us, Editor-in-Chief of News Laundry, who's been studying the news business very closely. Amy Kasman is the correspondent of Financial Times. The American press in particular has been fighting this in a rather aggressive way. And Arvind Gupta, who's the head of the BJP IT cell. We've had you here sometimes because many of the people who are your supporters are among the people who say the loudest that what the mainstream media is putting out is actually not true any more than what social media is doing. But before I come to the broader discussion, Jim, if I could just get you to tell us the sum and substance of the study that you found. You studied the Indian audiences and you found that 83% of them are concerned about fake news. But worryingly, 3/4 of them, 75% of them, were finding it tough to tell what was true and what was fake.
That's right, yeah, this was a study that we've just did in 5 countries across the Asia-Pacific region, including here in India. And as you say, the overwhelming majority of the Indians that we spoke to said they were concerned about fake news. They're also concerned about advertising and the role between advertisers and media publishers. But I think perhaps one of the most interesting findings coming out is that nearly three-quarters of people are saying they're finding it hard to tell the difference between what is fake and what is real. And I think if we're thinking about the role that media plays in politics and society more broadly, when you're in a position, and I have to say this is not just in India, we were getting similar results elsewhere, when you're in a position where people don't know what and whom to believe, that raises serious issues.
What is it that you're finding then? When people were telling you that we're finding it tough what to believe, are they tending to believe their own social circle, which would mean Facebook groups, WhatsApp groups, people who are sending them stuff on social media? Is that whom they're tending to believe more, or are they tending to believe what is called the mainstream media, well, the TV channels, the newspapers, I think established journalists?
The issue is particularly pronounced on social media platforms, in part because of the way social media platforms work with the algorithmically driven nature of them, where the more that you share and read stories from one particular source, the more you're likely to see of sources and opinions like that. But I don't think this is purely limited. This isn't just a social media phenomenon. I think in the press, and the press around the world has been quite algorithmically driven for centuries. You might argue that you take a particular editorial line and the audience knows that. And also on mainstream television news as well. I think there are some similar issues.
Are you seeing in Britain, and then I'm going to try and get some of the international examples before I come back to India, in Britain, are you seeing the same challenging of the mainstream media as you are seeing, for example, in the United States and here in India?
There are certainly concerns in Britain. I think, with last events in Manchester, people today are saying, well, what role was social media playing in the aftermath of that incident, positive and negative? So the debate is quite similar. I don't think it's quite as pronounced as it is in the US, where there really seems to be you know, a war of opinions and a war between media outlets. But for sure, I think this is part of what we found today, that, you know, concerns around fake news and the reliability of information that's a global phenomenon.
Amy, if I could just drag you to the United States, where many would say that we are seeing the high point of journalism. Some people are calling this the golden era of journalism in the US once again, because you're seeing a number of very prominent news organizations almost decisively being able to take on the government of the day. And that is seen as, you know, that's what the job of the press as a watchdog is. You're supposed to be able to hold the highest in the land accountable. And there's competition. Washington Post, New York Times, a number of other publications are doing a great job of that. Would you agree with that? Others will say that, well, actually it's not the high point, it's a low point, because these are people working to a particular, you know, mainstream media agenda, and what they're saying is all fake.
Well, I mean, I think basically you have two phenomena running in parallel. I think the U.S. election was, you know, a very disturbing time for many Americans, because there was a feeling that fake news may have tipped the outcome of the election. And there was a lot of looking at how through social media, you could put any story into a social media platform and get tons and tons of people to look at it and believe it to be true, and that the social media platforms like Facebook weren't doing anything to kind of assess whether these are true or false. So the kind of traditional structure where, as a newspaper, I mean, you know, you would try to source your stories, make sure the sourcing is correct. I mean, we all know even newspapers and TV can get wrong information, but there's a sense of like best efforts to get at the truth. And yet on the social media, you find that anybody sitting in his room can gin up any story that can be completely fake, and it can go viral and have a huge impact.
Arvind, before I come to Madhu on that, we are starting to see some of the consequences of that. What happened in Jharkhand? Now, whoever the people were who put out those fake reports about, you know, child lifters, are actually, I would say that they are complicit in the murders that took place. They are as guilty. People who put out that fake news story are as guilty as the mobs that actually killed those innocent people out there. Would you agree with that?
See,
and how do you curb this?
See, I think that's where the source of information makes a big difference in this whole world. I mean, we are living in a world of convergence, hyper news, 24/7 news cycles, and the digital world of convergence has just changed everything. A WhatsApp forward to me is not news, right? I mean, and as Amy said, and you know, everybody suggested, it's a world of algorithms. First, it was human algorithms. It was either editorial driven or owner driven or policy driven or maybe even advertising driven. Now it's computer driven. So more people watch it, it gets viralized, network effects take place, and the algorithm takes over and circulates the news. But the question really is, what is the source of this information? And if it is coming from unverified source, I don't consider it news. And as far as
now you don't, but there are many others on social media and among the public in general who would quite often, and including many, you know, BJP supporters, and not just BJP,
it can be anybody.
All party
it can be anybody. Yes.
They may sometimes trust what they're seeing on a WhatsApp forward or on a Facebook forward from a friend of theirs or from an associate of theirs more than they would trust that same information coming from an established news channel or a newspaper. And the reason is that they've lost faith or they've lost trust in that established channel.
Well, there are two things, Vikram, you're saying. You're self-incriminating yourself by saying people have lost trust. And that's one of the big reasons of emergence of social media, because the social media emerged so strongly because people lost trust in mainstream media. Please hear me out.
I don't totally agree. I don't agree with that.
That is totally. But I don't agree with that. Yes, I know I'm against mainstream media.
Social media, please come up.
No, but at the end of the day, this is exactly what happened in public opinion. So let me please complete my view, and I know I'm in a minority here, but second thing that has really happened is what you're talking about is fake news. And if it is coming as forwards, whether it's coming on Facebook or it's coming as a phone call, it's coming as SMS, there has to be a verification of the source, and that can come from anywhere. So Why blame the platforms for that when
but
the
how do you
people
verify? But how do you verify the
That's
source?
that's a very
How do you
challenging
verify the
task.
source?
That's a very challenging task.
How do you convince a mass of people these
That's a
days?
very challenging task. It's
These
equal to
days,
rumor mongering.
It's
It's
actually
rumor
not.
mongering.
It's
It's
not a
rumor
challenging
mongering.
task.
It's accelerated rumor mongering.
Absolutely.
And you have no way of verifying it. And by the way, these days there are a lot of people who are not that completely literate who are starting to get smartphones, and they are seeing those messages for the first time.
They see images
and
which
they
are- which
can't.
could
They
be
don't
very
necessarily
misleading.
know that there is less work that has been done, Madhu, to verify that than if they were seeing it on the BBC or
Vikram,
anybody
I think
else.
it's not, I disagree with Mr. Gupta, with due respect. It is not a challenging task. It simply needs some focus. If the government has content editors in the new media wing, which provide daily reports of the social media on what journalists are tweeting. They have the electronic media monitoring cell, which monitors 600 plus channels, including you, to mark who's doing positive, negative, or neutral stories. Now, consider that instead of that kind of those resources going into watch us and categorize us, those same resources the government can use on all their channels, including Lok Sabha TV, Rajya Sabha TV, Doordarshan TV, that when they discover, because they're monitoring all this, they know immediately when there's fake news on WhatsApp or whatever. They can use their channels to announce that this is fake news. These are not child traffickers.
I think that's a okay. So
that
a
is something
fact-checking
that it is
of some
not
sort.
challenging. It's just basically something that in this day and age the government must do.
Okay, so I'm going to come back to the origin of the news part of it in just a couple of minutes, because that brings us back to what I was saying. Maybe there is a crisis of confidence in established media, which is why part of the problem is coming up. So maybe that's the case. I'm going to come back to that question and touch on it in a minute. But the suggestion and the solution that Madhu was just saying, fact-checking and the flagging of content that is fake, including perhaps how can that be done? Is that something which you can leave to algorithms? Is there some way that communicate? How, for example, should you have the government saying, look, we are monitoring this, this is fake information that is going out, don't believe this, don't trust this, this is correct, this is not correct. Should that ever be something that the government should do?
I think in the long term there will be participation of these social media platforms in some sort of regulatory framework, but I use the term long term very, very deliberately, because I think short term knee-jerk, slightly old-fashioned regulatory reactions to what's going on are not going to be appropriate. And I say this as someone who used to work in the regulatory framework within the UK. The sort of permissions-based, licensed channels, clear broadcasting law and code, holding people to account, scrutinising and penalising if people get things wrong. I just don't think that's going to work in the environment that we live in, which is works on a purely global, not a national basis. The sheer volume of what is being produced and posted every single day is completely beyond the means of even Google and Facebook, despite the fact they've hired more than 10,000 people in the last 3 months to try to work in this. So there will be some sort of regulatory framework or construct or relationship, but it won't be like the one that we've used in the past. But this in and of itself is not going to be the sole answer to the problem. I think there is a long-term role for education, for people to figure out and be more discriminating about what they're reading.
But that's going to take a long time. You know, look at your own study. 75% of people are saying we can't distinguish what is real and what is fake. That's a frightening statistic.
It is
and also a candid admission. People don't know. I have people constantly sending me information and saying, how come you never reported this? And the answer is, well, it's not true. But, you know, how do you tell that?
I agree.
Madhu said maybe the government should be looking at some of this. He's saying he's not completely sure that it can.
I'm not talking about regulation. I will never ask for regulation by the government.
You're saying find a way of flagging information and putting it out.
There's no need to find a way. There is a way. They're already monitoring everything. So just use that instead of just putting us as positive, negative, neutral. Forget that. Use that software to find all the fake news and go on Doordarshan and say, don't believe this. You could provide.
So in Jharkhand, so let's look at a real example, Madhu. Let's look at a real example. Jharkhand, WhatsApp message is circulating. WhatsApp message is circulating in a particular area. How can somebody track it, and how would you put that information out in that particular part of Jharkhand?
Doordarshan has the highest viewership in India. Right? If you have got this message, put a bulletin out on Doordarshan and Lok Sabha and Rajya. Like what happened during the Northeast when all those fake messages and there was an exodus and people ran out, exodus out of fear. What a panic there was. All right, all they had to do was to put that message out and say these are fake photographs.
Okay.
it is a fake message, do not believe it.
Is that the
It's
effective way
simple.
of doing it, or at the end of the day,
See,
the platforms will have to find a way?
No, so there are two issues here. Number one, the scale of which sometimes these news, any news items viralize or get into the people's phones and starts getting consumed is so large that I don't think so human beings seeing something, whether they are the government or any platforms, can do it. I mean, what he just said, 3,000 people in Google and Facebook are trying to solve this problem with computers, with the best big data specialists and algorithms at work. So the challenge really lies in, you know, having learning networks which can then define and, you know, churn out the fake news, and that's what these big platforms are doing. But really what has happened, most of the fake news busting is really happening crowdsourcing on social media itself. The first place, most of the fake news, whether it's generated by wrong sources or by media or by anybody else, what you call trolling is busting of fake news most of the times, or agenda driven news. That is where it happens. It's crowdsourced. Now that happens on mass platforms, more literate platforms, more people with smartphones. If there's a WhatsApp forward, I am not sure what you know Madhuji is suggesting would work. It's impossible to track that. There are also issues of Section 66A and personal liberty at place. What groups, you know, you start listening to people's conversations like that. I think that's very risky. I would not suggest that.
Nobody's talking about listening to conversations. There's no extreme things like this. Nobody's asking for regulations.
I think what Madhu is saying is find a way of flagging
I'm saying
fake
that
news as
there
when you
is
see it.
Exactly, and
WhatsApp
they already
is
have the
completely
systems in
encrypted
place for the wrong people.
WhatsApp is completely encrypted communication. A group message goes to 50 people. It's all encrypted. How do you get into this?
One of the ways is what they're doing with WhatsApp is just to say, okay, somebody who's responsible, the administrator of that group will be held accountable.
People have been
It's
arrested.
self-learning. That's what I'm saying.
People
That's
have been
self-learning.
arrested for, you know,
Amy, any thoughts?
defamation.
How do you bust the
I mean,
fake
well,
news?
first of all, I kind of really dislike even using the term fake news to describe like things that are going around on WhatsApp, because I think that
That's not news.
dilutes the value of the news that we as professional people in the news are trying to do. I mean, this is basically rumor mongering. You know,
Thank you.
it's not
Okay,
news.
so then let me transfer that to then the crisis of confidence. Let's come to that other aspect of it. If you are ever engaging, and as all of us do, at a substantial level with a large number of people on social media, that's where the crisis is coming from. For a large period of time, for the last 30, 40, 50 years, if you look at human history, there used to be a time when you used to trust your village priest or your village headman or your immediate community in the village around you. That's the way news would spread. Word of mouth, you used to listen to people you actually knew. Then you had the era of mass media where you believed and trusted a Walter Cronkite or whoever, you know, you would hear these people, you would listen to them, you would believe them, you would trust it, and that is what would be considered the truth. This is what I saw on the mainstream news. Now we seem to be reaching a new situation where a large number of people are losing faith in what they're hearing on a TV screen or reading on a paper, and they're again choosing to listen to their local village headman or the equivalent, your local social network.
On a digital network.
On a digital network. That, let's face it, is a problem. So there is a crisis of trust. Now you could say it is justified or not justified. How do you overcome that crisis of trust?
I think it started, it's our own fault. It started when the largest news organization in India and the newspaper with the largest circulation in the world started paid news. They invented paid news and sold editorial space for profit. And that's when the trust of the public believing journalism as they read it started cracking. Secondly, now what has happened, when paid news just proliferated everywhere, it became a problem. Today, we have what you're calling like, what would you call it, journalism? No, I would not call it journalism, because today's anchors, some of them, have become this era's angry young man of Amitabh Bachchan, all right? He was a big Bollywood hit. He was a poor man who always spoke truth to power, and young people identified with him, and it was a Bollywood hit.
But they're not talking truth to power anymore. Now they're talking truth to the
exactly my
opposition.
point is. My point is that these people, these so-called journalists, these anchors, were shouting at people, telling them to shut up, calling them names, calling them worms, throwing them off shows. That's not journalism. They're not trying to get answers. They're not trying to get information. They're not trying to unfold a story. All they're doing is abusing in order to, it's like you know, the Romans watching the gladiators being devoured by lions. Now the problem here is that although Amitabh Bachchan spoke truth to power, in this era, these young people and young men and one lady don't speak truth to power.
I can't imagine whom you're talking about.
Exactly. It's not, they don't speak truth to power, they are speaking for the powerful. They are pushing the agenda and propaganda of political parties, being used by them as instruments.
Okay.
And so how can there not be a crisis of confidence?
Okay. If I could get you back in on that, on the ideological part. Look, what is it that, I mean, we're starting off in journalism, what were you told? You were told and you were taught that you should speak for the truth and try and take a balanced position with both sides of the story. Today, when you try and do reports which are balanced in looking at both sides of the story, you get slammed by both sides in what has become a very ideologically driven situation.
Actually,
which is why, especially in America, everyone seems to have taken a very clear political position that I support X person, and that's happening in India now. You're seeing people taking a very explicit political position.
I mean, I always think if you're getting slammed by both sides, you're probably doing a pretty good job. But I think here also a phenomenon that a phenomenon that we're really witnessing again as kind of people adjust to this social media is you're actually seeing a situation where political leaders and members of the establishment, I mean, in the past they would try to disseminate their messages through the media, but the media wasn't just, I mean, they weren't just propaganda channels, so you could come and deliver your message, but they would ask tough questions, they would demand details, they would ask for specificities. Now you have a situation where you have political leaders and policymakers that think, why should we have to answer, you know, the pesky questions of these annoying journalists? Let's put out a few tweets, you know, boom, 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 and we don't, and you know, our followers will see our message, and so actually it becomes, you know, a more of a propaganda style. And then the problem is when actual journalists try to answer questions, they just think, well, we've put out a tweet, why should we have to deal with you?
So let me just end now, I'm out of time, by asking you a couple of questions. What you call actual journalists going out and trying to find what the truth is that going to be an endangered species, where either you will have journalistic organizations which will be representing political ideologies and therefore reflecting on whatever that version of the truth is, or will it be entirely in the hands of some sort of a crowdsourced social media type of information?
I don't think the age of the journalists is dead. 10 years ago, everyone was panicking about citizen journalism, user-generated content and so on. That didn't kill off journalism. I don't think what we're witnessing right now is going to kill off journalism. But journalism has to change. I think the era of what some call false balance, where all the newscaster had to do was to say, well, on one side she's saying this and he's saying that, you figure it out. I think that is over. But I think the imperative of the essence of journalism and a balance of perspectives is really important. So just as we think our role is in helping people understand why people voted for Trump or why people voted for Brexit, or perhaps why people may disagree with some of the things that are happening in India, confronting opinions you don't like from people you don't necessarily agree with, that is part of the role of journalism, and that's part of the democratic role of journalism.
Well, Vikram, can I just add one thing? That today, one of the biggest problems is that a lot of, in fact, our laws are being flouted, that sub judice is not considered sub judice. Cases are being discussed which are still being investigated. Anchors are saying you can't run away from us, you have to answer, as if they're the CBI, which, you know, obviously they're not. There is a situation where pseudo-nationalism is being used to boost viewership. That is a problem because it demoralizes the armed forces. The third thing is that we do have a problem that most of the people get sucked into this and do believe that this is journalism, and that is a problem.
Yeah, you need to know what is real journalism, and even that's up for question. Okay, we are out of time, but I'll get one last quick.
I think what you know, my colleague from BBC was saying is true, is that the polling is now happening on real time. News, whatever you throw out as content, which will still remain king, good content will remain king, but polling is happening in real time, and people need to judge what is being consumed and the criticism that is being received in a positive manner, not take it as troll.
All right, I'm going to have to end it there for the moment. Thank you all so much for joining us, and Jim, thanks for being for the research that you've dug out here in India. It's been a pleasure. You're watching Reality Check. We'll be back again.